There's a question that comes up very, very often. How do I rotate properly and when should I rotate? This question is not easily answered, and part of being a very good player, very experienced player, is knowing when to rotate. This video will give you the basics of when you should consider rotating, but in the end, rotations is something that you just have to learn with practice, either by seeing how others do it and when others do it, or by playing yourself and getting a better feel for when it is helpful to rotate and when it is not. That said, there are specific indicators or rules of thumb, so to speak, that you can use in order to rotate better and get a basic grip of when a rotation is helpful. So first of all, you should consider which position you're in. Rotations differ completely depending on the position. There are two roles that are generally expected to rotate less. Those are the ADC or Hunter role and the Solo role. Both of these only really rotate when there's an objective to be secured or when they have a strong lead in lane that allows them to rotate out until the very high levels of play where they do the quicker rotations. This is, in terms of duo lane, especially important for the Gold Fury. In terms of the solo lane, it is important to either secure your camps together with the jungler or get the fire elementals, and aside of that, doing bigger rotations to the Gold Fury or Fire Giant when necessary. The lane, so to speak, that rotates the most is the support, who will often rotate out of lane and help other lanes. The jungler is basically not an actual lane and will rotate even more, but all a jungler does is rotate, so it can't really be counted in that same regard. The mid laner is somewhere in between, but a strong mid laner is also going to rotate a lot because that gives the team a lot of pressure, and that's what the mid laner is basically designed for. He gets that early power that allows him to rotate out and make game-changing plays in the early game. Let's begin with the Hunter and then move on to the next roles. The Hunter will typically stay in his lane until he's very, very farmed. He rotates to the back harpies, he rotates to the Gold Fury when there's a call for it, but other than that, his goal is to get to late game. A rotation to mid lane can be fine if there's a big fight breaking out or the enemy Hunter moved to mid lane, but you will hardly ever see a Hunter rotating to solo lane because there's not much of a reason for him to be there unless it's to stop a split pusher or to secure a Fire Giant. The solo laner rotates slightly more because he has a little more impact in earlier team fights than the Hunter, but generally the solo laner wants to farm a lot as well. Depending on who you play, the rotations can differ here. For example, if you're playing a Raven or a Loki who have more aggression potential in mid game, you might rotate out a little earlier and try to get kills on the mid laner. The solo laner will be more likely to rotate over towards duo lane sometimes as well, simply to secure earlier Gold Furies with the team, and also because he has teleport. The solo laner can abuse that and rotate out for a gank somewhere very unexpected, and then just teleport back to his lane, or he can teleport somewhere else and then just walk back to his lane if he's got clearing advantage at that point. A solo laner should mostly rotate when he has got a lead in lane or when the situation requires him to rotate. This can be because your team needs help securing the Gold Fury, but you're sure that you'll get it. Or on the other hand, if you have a feeling that you might help out in a team fight and you have pushed up your lane. A solo laner should avoid minions running into his tower when he can. Obviously, this counts for every other lane, but it's not as crucial in mid lane where you have others that can rotate there quickly, whereas in solo lane, it's usually just the solo laner being there. As a mid laner, you can start rotating relatively early. As soon as you get some clear going and you outclear your opponent, or you're able to clear the wave at the same time, you can try and look for rotations. Sometimes it makes sense to just rotate out to the next camp and clear that, but sometimes it's better to just rotate onto another lane and get an unexpected gank going, ideally together with your jungler to secure that gank being an actual kill. This can happen very, very early into the game. You can see mid laners rotating around level 3 sometimes. If you're not that confident, make sure to stay in lane a little longer, but definitely start rotating when you see the enemy mid laner rotating. That should be the latest signal that you should be moving, unless you have a strong, clear disadvantage and you need that farm and you're a more late game focused mid laner, or you're a mid laner that can actually push his tower like Kronos or Sol. You should not be spending time as a mid laner pushing the enemy tower otherwise, because if you do that, you're just wasting time that you could use to rotate. Middle laners, mages won't deal too much damage against structures in general. You're better off just pushing your minion wave into the tower and then moving somewhere else and getting more advantage for your team overall than giving that tower a little bit of extra poke, because you can't use abilities on it and the basic attacks don't deal much damage. Like I said, there are exceptions, but those are the minority. On this note, coming back to hunters real quick, this is obviously different for hunters because hunters are actually able to push their structures down, and solo laners get an advantage out of pushing structures down as well. That leaves us with two roles, the support and the jungler. Let's talk about the jungler first. The jungler is basically rotating most of the time. However, the jungler should also make sure to catch waves in between. Minion waves give the most experience in the game if you look at it in the bigger picture of like how much effort you have to use to clear them and how much you get out of it. So you should not just be running from camp to lane and ignore the waves. You should stay in waves for a short time in order to clear those and then move on to the next lane when it is needed, or when you see gank potential, or when you see any buffs coming up. But don't just run from left to right and ignore the waves. That's crucial as a jungler. As a jungler, sometimes rotating less is more. For every other role, it's probably rather the opposite. And that brings us to the support. In terms of rotations, I would say the support is probably one of the harder roles. The support does not have the same potential in terms of rotations as a jungler in most cases, simply because a jungler has a speed buff and he also has abilities in his kit that allow him to rotate faster. You can make up with that by buying specific boots, but it's not always going to be enough. Early game, the support will always be with his ADC. You will see early rotations happening sometimes, but for most supports, it's important to help the ADC on one hand and soak up some XP as well, and you won't soak up XP as effectively anywhere else without annoying any one of your teammates. So until around level 5, I would say it's pretty much always best to stay in lane. After that, it becomes a lot more complicated. Often you will have a stronger fight scenario in duo lane around level 5. When the ultimates are used, you will get wards and go from there. Definitely make sure to always rotate out to place the wards. Wards are crucial, and wards will also allow you to know better if you should rotate. If you have a lot of vision on the map and what's going on, you will see much better if a rotation somewhere will be needed or will be helpful. If you spot out an enemy in your jungle, then you know you can rotate there. If you don't have the ward, you won't know that. So the first step in learning how to rotate as a support is to buy wards. Aside of that, check with your ADC. If it's an ADC that is very strong in lane and he's got an advantage already, then you should probably better leave them alone, let them soak up solo experience and gold, and help somewhere else where you're more helpful. If the enemy support is staying in lane and they're bullying out your ADC, then you should obviously not leave lane and assist your ADC instead. That way you know that the enemy hunter and support will stay on the same level as you two anyways, because there's two on each side, and at the same time you will make sure that your ADC doesn't die or get bullied out and lose farm in any regard. When you rotate, you can pretty much move across the whole field, even into solo lane. Often it is helpful to rotate together with the jungler to get off a better gank by using your strong crowd control combined with the jungler's damage and whoever is in that lane in order to maximize the potential for the gank. Sometimes it's good to just spot out someone in mid lane who is on his own and then help out your mid laner by CCing for them and giving them kill potential. Sometimes it's just better to make sure to pick off someone who's low, even as a support, and secure the kill. So there are many different scenarios where a support will roll out for different purposes. And those can also include things like objective holding or objective securing. By objective holding, I mean sometimes it's helpful to just rotate somewhere to make sure the enemy knows you're there and therefore apply some kind of pressure. So if you rotate to Gold Fury and the enemy is looking at Gold Fury, they will know, okay, we've been spotted out, we will be interrupted while doing this Gold Fury, and they might back off before even attempting to do it, even if they might have a chance to secure it, depending on how good their game knowledge is. The one thing that you should not do as a support is rotate somewhere and try to push a structure. Supports have even worse structure push than mages, so there is not much of a point in doing that unless you have more teammates there. Instead, try to rotate somewhere where your teammates are and help them out. You can tank up a tower for them, that's great, but you cannot push down a structure. You're wasting time. If you could have done it with a support, the minions could have probably done it without you anyways. So that's one of the things where you're really wasting time. Anything else is pretty much justifiable. And as a support, you will fall behind in XP most of the time just for that very reason. Because you're required to rotate a lot, you can't soak up as much XP and you don't have the same speed as a jungle doing so. You're also likely to get less kills than them. So all in all, you will have downsides for having to rotate that much. But it's very well worth it, and you should do it in most scenarios, unless there's really absolutely no reason to do so, or you just don't feel comfortable rotating all that much yet. This is totally fine on lower levels of play. When you just get used to the game, you may not be willing to sacrifice so much just for the rotation. You may have an unexperienced ADC who's going to bitch at you for leaving lane. So sometimes, even though it's not ideal, it's totally fine to stay in lane just to make sure that the general game feels more safe for you and you have a feeling that you will have more potential in later stages of the game. There is an interesting chart that Lion-kun on Reddit made over a year ago. He's sadly not active anymore, but this guide has this chart has some interesting decisions regarding to when you should be rotating. I do not fully agree with all of these, but I feel like there's definitely a lot of information in there just to get a basic idea if you're just learning how to do this kind of stuff. So I will show it to you here and I'll also link it in the description. So if that's helpful for you, then I'm glad to help you with that as well. Thank Lion-kun for that. With that, thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you next time. New videos every day. Duke Sloth, out.